In the village of Eliulu, silence was law, and words were more feared than weapons. Tucked deep in the eastern hills, surrounded by thick tamarind trees and rivers that shimmered with secrets, Eliulu was a place of ancient customs and quiet terror. The wind itself seemed to whisper warnings, and the air was always thick with listening. No girl over the age of 10 was permitted to speak. Not a word. Not a cry. Not even a whisper. It was said that long ago, a woman's voice had shattered the sky, cracked the earth, and called down a curse so terrible that it twisted the bones of men and made rivers run backward. The elders never told the whole tale, only that the voice of a woman had once brought the village to its knees. Since then, they claimed, silence kept the curse at bay. Girls were raised like shadows. They were taught to braid hair and grind millet, to kneel and to nod, but not to speak. Words, they were told, were like wildfires. Once loosed, they burned everything in their path. The only voices that filled the air were those of men and boys, priests and chiefs. When a girl turned 10, her tongue was bound with a silk thread during the silence ritual, and she would drink from the bitter gourd. After that, she would never speak again. If she did, if she so much as murmured a song, she risked banishment, or exile, or worse. The worse was never described. The worse had no name. One night, beneath a swollen blood moon that turned the river red and made cattle refuse to eat, a baby girl was born. Her cries were not soft, not shy, not small. They cracked through the compound like thunder cracking a tree in half. Elders woke from sleep. The wind stopped. Even the goats silenced themselves. The child screamed and screamed, and no one could stop her. Her mother, sweat-soaked and wide-eyed, clutched her until the very breath left her chest. When the midwife unwrapped the baby from the cloth, she whispered, "This child will not be quiet." Her grandmother, a hunched, wrinkled woman with river eyes, looked at the crimson moon, looked at the baby, and said one name, Maku. It meant the one who listens too deeply. Maku's mother was buried before the moon could fade. Some whispered that the scream had torn something loose inside her. Others believed she had been cursed for birthing a loud daughter. But Maku lived. Her eyes were sharp even as an infant, always watching, always waiting. As she grew, she did not cry as much. Instead, she listened, to the birds, to the trees, to footsteps that others ignored. Her father, a man of strict silence and sharp hands, watched her with deep unease. "You will learn," he told her, "or your tongue will dig your grave." When she was 5, he caught her humming. He held her over a fire pit until her lashes curled. After that, she hummed only in her dreams. But the silence never suited her. She would hide in the shade of the old fig tree and whisper stories to herself. She spoke to ants, to rocks, to her mother's grave. And when no one was watching, she would murmur questions into the earth, as if it could answer. Maka did not fear her voice. She feared the world's fear of it. She saw how women looked down when spoken to, how their shoulders curved inward, how they cried without sound. Maka wondered what would happen if someone simply shouted. Not in anger. Not in pain. Just shouted for the sake of being heard. She didn't know it yet, but her voice would not only be heard, it would echo. It would burn. And it would not ask for permission. By the time Maka turned 12, she had learned how to move her lips in rhythm with the wind so that the world would not notice she was speaking. Her voice was still soft, as if she were unbraiding each syllable gently from her chest, but it had grown strange, warm and low, like earth after rain. She spoke when she was alone, not to people, but to the things beneath her feet and above her head. She spoke to trees, to stones, to rivers that forgot their own paths. When no one was looking, she would kneel and place her lips near the roots of the old irako and whisper secrets too big for silence. The village did not hear her, but the world did. It began with little things. One morning, before the yam festival, the baobab tree behind the shrine bloomed too early. Bright white flowers burst from its trunk like stars. The elders called it a bad omen. A few days later, the chief's goat, which had been sick for weeks, rose to its feet after lying in its own filth, bleated once, and walked straight to the river to drink. Children said Maku had been seen near the goat the night before, crouching low, singing something into the earth. Some laughed. Some grew afraid. But most shook their heads and whispered, "Mad girl." Maku never reacted when they hissed at her in the market or when mothers pulled their daughters away from her. She wasn't interested in people. They lied too easily. Their words were sharp or empty, never soft enough to sink into the soil. Instead, Maku walked barefoot to the forest edge and listened. The trees spoke in creaks, the stones sighed with memory, and the river gurgled gossip. She didn't always understand, but she never stopped listening. Her stepsister Tari did, though. Tari noticed everything. She was the kind of girl the village praised, obedient, still, silent. Her hair was always tied back neatly, her eyes always lowered. But in her chest burned something brittle. It grew each time Maku returned home with dirt on her knees and moss on her hands. It grew when their father would beat Maku and Maku would look at him without flinching. And it grew most when she heard the villagers whisper, "She's strange, that one," with a strange hint of awe. Tari followed her more than once. She watched Maku kneel beside a termite hill and speak as if the insects were kings. She once saw her place a palm over a stone and hum until a butterfly landed there. "Foolish girl," she whispered to herself. "Cursed girl." One day, Maku wandered farther than usual, past the farms, past the forgotten shrines, deep into a part of the woods that elders warned children about. She wasn't afraid. The deeper the silence, the more clearly she could speak. There, she found a tree unlike the others. It was tall and twisted, with roots like reaching fingers and bark stained dark as oil. Its leaves did not rustle, even when the wind pressed them. Beneath it, the air felt thick. Maku called it the weeping tree. She sat beneath it and pressed her lips to its roots. "I know you're sad," she said softly. "I feel it, too." A rustle. A groan. A hush. "You remember things," she whispered. "Like me." She spoke to it for a long time, about her mother, about the silence, about the way her father's anger cracked the walls. She didn't expect anyone to hear. But someone did. Abadil, the village chief's son, had been hunting alone when he heard her voice. It wasn't loud. It was a song inside a whisper, a melody made of earth. He stepped quietly toward it and saw her, hair wild, hands cupped around the base of the tree, eyes closed. The tree, strange and unmoving, seemed to bend toward her slightly. Her words, though muffled, struck him deeply. Why is truth feared? Why must silence be safety? What lives in the quiet that makes men afraid? He felt something inside him shift, like a root tugged loose. He didn't speak to her. He couldn't. Instead, he backed away and never told anyone what he had heard. But he didn't forget. The sound of her voice followed him like the smell of rain before a storm. Back in the village, the elders had grown uneasy. Too many signs. Too many whispers. A tree that bloomed early. A goat that rose. A boy who swore he saw vines growing from a mortar after Maku walked by. They summoned her father. Your daughter, one of them said, invites spirits with her tongue. Another added, control her. Or we will. Her father came home with thunder in his fists. He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait. He pulled Maku out from the cooking hut, grabbed the wooden box where she kept her books, her leaves, her sketches of root systems and river paths, and threw them into the fire. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She watched the pages curl, then turned and walked back into the dark. That night, with her lips split and her arm aching, she walked behind the compound to the mango tree that had grown beside her mother's grave. She pressed her forehead against its bark and whispered, I will not stop. The wind stirred. I will speak even if no one hears. A leaf dropped beside her. I will not be buried in silence. I will grow from it. Behind her, Tari watched, eyes cold. She would not be silent either, not out of defiance, but jealousy. And that jealousy would soon find ears ready to listen. But for now, Maku spoke. Into the soil. Into the dark. Into the night. And somewhere, something ancient was beginning to listen back. The drought came like a punishment. First, the air thickened and turned to smoke. Then the rains, which usually danced across Eliulu in silver curtains by the second moon, simply never came. The fields cracked open like mouths begging for water. Yams shriveled underground. Palm trees dropped brown leaves like curses. Chickens collapsed in their coops with dust in their throats. The river that wound behind the village shrank to a dirty trickle, revealing bones and secrets. Even the old shrine at the center of the village, the one guarded by stone lions and swept every dawn, stayed silent. Not a whisper from the gods. Not a flicker of favor. Just heat, stillness, and thirst. People grew desperate. Children cried through the night. Elders burned herbs that had long been forbidden. Some said it was the punishment of forgotten ancestors. Others swore that the gods had turned their backs on Eliulu because someone had broken the ancient laws. But no one spoke the name on everyone's tongue. Not yet. Maku watched all this in silence. Not out of fear, but out of waiting. The wind had told her what was coming. The trees had turned their leaves upside down before the drought began. She had warned her father. He struck her. She had whispered to Tari. Tari ignored her. She had placed a bowl beneath the baobab and spoken softly into the water, but no one listened, not even the forest. So on the 8th week of thirst, when an old woman collapsed in the village square and no one had enough water to pour on her face, Maka rose before dawn and walked. She did not take a jug. She did not take food. She walked barefoot, past the sleeping huts, past the empty market, and past the elders' quarters. She carried nothing but her voice. She climbed the sacred hill, the place no woman was allowed to stand, let alone speak. The hill was where the first god was said to have wept after losing his daughters to the sea. At the top stood a crumbling stone altar, half covered in moss. Maku stood before it, her feet sinking slightly into the dry, cracked earth. She looked up at the swollen, angry sky. She did not bow. She did not ask. She spoke. Enough. The word cracked the air like a whip. Somewhere in the distance, a bird shrieked. Then silence. She closed her eyes and whispered again. If silence feeds pain, then let my words feed life. The wind howled. Let what I give with my tongue return as rain. And then, for the first time in weeks, the sky opened. The rain didn't begin gently. It came like a scream, like someone had ripped the heavens in half. Water poured down in thick sheets. It slammed into roofs and splashed into empty jugs. Children ran out half-dressed and lifted their hands. Mothers wept openly. The fields drank. The river sighed. And Maku, soaked to her bones, walked back down the hill with her head high. She said nothing as she passed the stunned eyes of the villagers, their lips parted, their bodies frozen between awe and terror. She said nothing when she returned to her compound, wrung out her wrapper, and sat beside her mother's grave. She didn't need to speak. The rain had spoken for her. But awe never lasts long in Eliulu, not when fear is stronger. That night, the whispers began. She spoke on the sacred hill. She defied the gods. Maybe it was her tongue that caused the drought in the first place. Tari didn't start the rumors. But she didn't silence them either. She let them grow, feeding them with glances and sighs. Then, quietly, she added her own words. I've seen her talking to shadows. To trees. To spirits in the dirt. Cursed girl, one elder muttered. She's tricked the gods, said another. So they called for the judgment circle. The whole village gathered around the fire pit in the main square. The elders wore their red robes and bone necklaces. The chief sat on his carved stool. Maku's father stood behind her, his hands twitching with shame. Tari sat to the side, head bowed, eyes glittering. Maku stood in the center. Barefoot. Unshivering. One elder stood. Did you climb the sacred hill? I did. Did you speak to the gods? I spoke. Murmurs rippled. Why? Another elder demanded. Do you believe you have the right? Mako looked at them, at the men whose words had caged every girl she had ever known. I don't ask for the right, she said. I ask for the rain. Another elder rose. You think your voice called the clouds? That's pride. That's witchcraft. Maku's voice was steady. Words are not curses. They are roots. They feed what we bury. Someone gasped. The chief, face dark with fury, raised his staff. She has broken our oldest law. She has brought danger to us all. The verdict was swift. No one dared challenge it. She will be chained to the whispering tree for 3 days. If she survives, she may live. If not, the gods will have spoken. No cries came from the crowd. Only the crackle of the fire and the slow breath of wind that passed through like a ghost with no name. Maku nodded once. She turned her face to the sky and let the last drops of rain fall across her skin. Then she whispered something too quiet for anyone to hear, except, perhaps, the earth beneath her feet. They took her before dawn. No words. No cries. Just heavy footsteps and the clinking of iron cuffs that had not been used in years. For men, masked, silent, obedient, led her out through the forest path, past the yam fields and abandoned altars, into the dense shadows where birds no longer sang. She didn't fight. Her feet moved over the cold soil as if it remembered her name. In her silence, the air felt thick, like something was waiting just beyond the trees. They brought her to the base of the whispering tree, a twisted giant, older than the oldest names in Elulu. Its bark curled like cracked lips, its roots snaked through the earth like tendrils in search of memory. No one came here. Not anymore. The tree was a relic from before the silence, before the village buried its voice in fear. Some said it once spoke to the gods. Others claimed it had devoured a child whole. Now, it was her prison. They forced her wrists behind the trunk and fastened them with chains blackened from age. The iron bit into her skin instantly, rough with rust. A fifth man, the eldest of the judgment circle, produced a strip of leather and bound it around her mouth. To guard the village from your tongue, he said without looking into her eyes. Then they left her. Just like that. The forest swallowed their footsteps, and she was alone. She did not weep. She did not scream. She leaned her cheek against the bark, and beneath the cold of the iron, the tree felt warm. The first day, the sun blazed. Sweat mixed with blood from her wrists, and flies circled lazily around her ankles. Her knees buckled from thirst, but the tree held her upright. Her eyes blurred from the hunger, from the ache of stillness, from the sting of betrayal. But her mind did not quiet. She listened, the way she always had. That night, something changed. The leaves rustled, but no wind blew. The roots shifted beneath her feet. The bark pressed gently against her spine, not harsh, not punishing, but as if adjusting to her shape. Then came a sound. It wasn't a voice exactly, not like a man's voice. It was the sound of groaning branches, the creak of old wood, the hum of stones warmed by the sun. It spoke like breath traveling through the bones of the forest. Why do you not cry? She did not answer. Her mouth was bound. But she turned her head, so her lips grazed the tree's surface. You listen, it said. So I will speak. Her body trembled. Not from fear, from recognition. She had waited all her life to be answered. I am Isenuo, the voice said. King of spirits. Root of roots. Tongue of the first soil. Maku's eyes widened. Do you know what it means to be heard? The tree asked. She nodded. Tears finally welled at the corners of her eyes, then vanished into the bark. What do you seek, girl of thunder? Her breath caught. She pressed her lips hard to the wood, and though the leather gag remained, her thoughts spilled out like waves. She whispered not with her tongue but with something deeper, from the marrow. Freedom. For those who are chained by rules made in fear. Truth. For the broken women who walk like shadows and die unheard. Voice. Not just hers, but for every girl told that her silence is survival. The tree did not respond. But its roots stirred, curling upward, brushing gently against her toes like a mother's hand smoothing a child's hair. She leaned into it. And for the first time since the chains closed, she slept. On the second day, her body weakened. Her lips cracked. Her fingers grew numb. The sky stayed gray, clouds forming but refusing to cry. Birds landed nearby but did not come close. A fox circled once, then disappeared. That night, the tree spoke again. Do you regret speaking? She shook her head slowly. Even if it brings pain? She blinked, once, long and steady. You are not alone, it said. The ground beneath her pulsed faintly, and for a moment, she thought she heard a chorus, faint, distant, like hundreds of whispers woven into the soil. They did not speak words. But they mourned, and hoped, and remembered. These are the buried voices, said Iznuo. The women before you. The ones who dared whisper. The ones who sang only once. The ones who screamed when no one came. They rest within me. You have awakened them. Maku's heart pounded weakly. You are not the first, the tree said. But you may be the last who kneels. On the third day, the sky changed. It turned an unnatural shade of violet. The clouds churned like boiling water. Winds picked up, circling the tree in invisible currents. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and ancient. Maku, barely conscious, raised her head. The bark beneath her cheek thrummed like a heartbeat. Are you ready? Iznuo asked. She mouthed one word, even through the gag. Yes. Then the lightning came. It did not strike the tree. It entered it, pouring from the heavens in a blinding spear of white flame. The trunk glowed. The roots flared. Sparks burst from the chains, and iron screamed as it twisted and split. The fire did not touch her skin, but her blood roared. Her eyes, once soft brown, turned ink black, ringed with violet. She stood. The chains hung, melted and useless, at her feet. She reached up, tore the gag from her mouth, and exhaled, and the air itself bent around her breath. When the villagers arrived at dawn, they came with spears and ropes, thinking they'd find a corpse. What they found was a blackened ring where the tree once stood. No body. No branches. No chains. Only the silence of something impossible. And the echo of something awakening. When the villagers reached the clearing, the air smelled of ash and lightning. Their feet slowed as they neared the place where they had chained Maku only 3 nights before. But the tree, the mighty whispering tree that had stood for generations, was gone. There were no leaves, no branches, no roots. Only a blackened circle carved deep into the ground, like the land itself had been branded. The iron chains lay in the center, coiled and broken, scorched at every link. The bark that had once told stories with wind and time was gone, as if it had never existed. There were no footprints, no blood. No sign of the girl. No sign of the tree. Just silence. The men who had chained her stood still, faces pale and dripping with sweat. One knelt and touched the ground. It was warm. Too warm. She's gone, one whispered. Not just her, another added. The whole tree is gone. The eldest among them stepped forward, face gray. This is not of man, he said, voice hollow. This is demon work. That word, demon, spread like fire through the village by dusk. Children were pulled indoors. Pregnant women were kept inside. Even the hunters refused to go into the deeper woods. Elders gathered in hushed panic. What had they unleashed? What curse had they triggered? If the whispering tree had accepted Maku, then what did that mean? The official story, declared the next morning in the village square, was that Maku had been taken by spirits. They painted her as a possessed girl, a vessel of madness. Her words were spells, said one elder. Her voice, unnatural. They claimed she had vanished in punishment or in payment, no one knew which. But the fear was too thick to leave room for truth. Tari, now standing alone in her father's compound, quickly rose in the eyes of the people. She fetched water for the elders, swept the shrine steps without being asked, smiled with lips sealed shut. She became what Maka never was, docile, safe, soundless. Mothers praised her. Boys looked her way. The chief's wife even invited her to help in the storeroom, saying, "You see how peace returns when the wildness is gone?" But the peace was short. 2 weeks after Maka's disappearance, the rain stopped again. This time, the clouds didn't even bother to form. The wind turned dry. Wells dropped lower. Bananas shriveled on the branch. The river grew slower each day, as if mourning. Worse, something had shifted in the nights. It started with whispers. Soft at first, like rustling grass. Then clearer. One widow said she heard her own name breathed into her ear while she cooked. Another woman claimed she woke to find her daughter sleepwalking, murmuring, "She listens now, she listens now." A third, childless and near blind, stood outside the compound at midnight, staring into the woods, whispering, "Maku. Maku. Maku." The elders dismissed the stories. Hysteria, they said. Fear speaks louder than sense. But they could not deny what they all felt, the weight in the air, like something watching, waiting, just beyond the trees. At night, when the wind blew from the forest, people swore they heard weeping, not loud, but layered, like 100 voices trapped just beneath the soil. Some even heard laughter. Not joyful, sharp, cracked, like the bark of the tree that was no longer there. One girl, no older than 9, was caught whispering to a calabash bowl in her sleep. When asked what she was saying, she replied, "I was telling her where it hurts." The village grew quiet again, not out of law, but fear. Tari, in her growing discomfort, began to feel something strange in her bones. Sometimes, when she stood too close to the shrine, her ears rang. Sometimes, when she walked past Maka's old sleeping mat, the floor felt warm. And once, in the middle of the night, she woke to find a vine growing from the inside of her door, curling toward her face. She chopped it down with a knife, hands shaking. But the next morning, it had grown back, longer. No one spoke Maka's name aloud anymore. But everyone felt her. Gone. Yes. But gone where? Gone how? The elders warned against asking. Do not stir the silence, they said. But the silence no longer belonged to them. It began with the graves. One morning, the burial mounds behind the elder shrine were found covered in green. Not weeds, not grass, but vines, thick, flowering, and unfamiliar. They pulsed faintly in the dawnlight, curling over headstones, pushing through the clay. Some bore tiny red blossoms, shaped like open mouths. Others wrapped around bones that had surfaced, dragging them gently back into the soil. The villagers stared, frozen. No one dared cut them. By midday, the vines had slithered beyond the graves. One curled around the base of the drum tower. Another reached the compound gate. The elders ordered them hacked down, burned, buried. Men with blades came, swinging wildly. But by dusk, the vines were back, thicker, brighter, humming. Then the shrine cracked. It was the oldest structure in Elialu, built long before the rules of silence. Its roof was woven from sacred palm, its doors carved with symbols only the ancestors could read. It had never split. Never broken. Not even in storms. But one night, a long, sharp crack split it from top to base. Like a tree hollowed out by lightning. No one had touched it. No one had heard it fall. And in the morning, there it stood, open, useless, a wound in the village center. Inside the crack, roots had grown. Not beneath the floor. Through it. Pale, knotted tendrils pushed between the stone, curling upward like fingers breaking through skin. They wrapped around the ancestor totems. Cradled the prayer bowl. Even pressed gently against the mouth of the lion statue that had once been the village's guardian. The silence afterward was not sacred. It was terrified. Then came the first death. Elder Aragbo, a man who had once ordered Maku's mouth gagged, was found dead behind his compound. He had not been ill. He had not cried out. But there he lay, eyes wide, tongue swollen, neck wrapped in a lattice of green vines. Some were thin and silky. Others were coarse and thorned. But all of them had grown through his throat, up from the earth beneath his bed. No one touched the body. The rain came down that night and buried him in mud before the grave diggers could arrive. That was when the children began whispering. Stories, they said. If you whisper into a leaf, she will hear you. If you sleep with a wound no one sees, she will find you. If you have no voice, speak to a vine, and it will carry your words. At first, the stories were dismissed. But then the disappearances began. Not everyone, only girls. Not loud ones, the quiet ones. The shadowed. The ignored. First it was Biba, the girl with a burned scar on her shoulder and a mother who cursed too often. Then Risi, whose voice had never been heard in public and who always walked barefoot, even when the ground was hot. Then Nina, the girl who had once watched Maku in the forest and never told. One by one, they vanished. Their doors opened quietly. No screams. No blood. No struggle. Just a mark left behind, always the same. A single green vine, twisted into a knot, placed at the foot of the bed. The elders called for prayer. The women called for answers. But Tari knew. She saw it coming long before the others did. It began with the dreams. She'd wake gasping, tangled in sweat, her throat raw as if she'd been screaming all night. But she hadn't made a sound. Not a single one. Yet her room echoed with breath. Then the voices returned. Not in shouts, not in screams, but in hums. Soft melodies pressed against her walls, coming from nowhere. Sometimes, when she turned, she swore she saw Maku's silhouette standing in the doorway. Not angry. Just watching. Breathing. Once, she reached for a calabash bowl and found it filled with blackened petals. Then came the message. One night, she rose early to fetch water. Her heel brushed against something rough beneath the bed. She crouched, lifted the reed mat, and stared. Scratched into the floorboards, deep and jagged, were the words. You took my tongue. I took your roots. She fell backward, gasping. Her hands trembled. Her skin burned. She tried to tell her father, but her voice shook too much to speak. She tried to tell the elders, but their eyes darted, and none wanted to hear that name again. So she was alone. Until the roots came for her too. They crept in at night, slipping beneath the cracks in the walls. She saw them slithering from under the stool, reaching toward her blankets. Once, she woke with one curled around her wrist, like a bracelet. It left a mark, black, like ash. She wore long sleeves for days. Everywhere she turned, she felt the village decaying, not falling apart, but being taken back. Pulled into something older. Something hidden beneath all their silence. The wind no longer obeyed the trees. The air no longer carried just dust, it carried whispers. And still, more girls disappeared. By the 8th girl, even the mothers began to believe. They stopped punishing their daughters for speaking. They stopped binding mouths during the silence ritual. One mother, terrified and desperate, led her child to the tree stump where the whispering tree once stood and placed her daughter's hands on the soil. Tell her your sorrow, she whispered. The girl leaned forward and said only, he hits me when no one sees. She vanished that night, into nothing. No footprints. No sound. But the next morning, a patch of flowers bloomed in the exact spot. Blood red. Petal-shaped like open mouths. By now, even the elders could no longer pretend. The land was changing. The rules were unraveling. And at the center of it all was the memory of a girl who had dared to speak. A girl they had chained. A girl they thought they had buried, but who had been planted. And the forest? It was growing louder. The hunters had no intention of finding anything new. They simply wanted to track the strange prints near the river, clawed marks, not quite animal, not quite human. They moved in silence, 5 men with bows strapped to their backs, blades at their hips, and prayers in their throats. The wind tugged at their wrappers. Something about the air felt off. It was colder. Thicker. As though the forest breathed differently. But when they reached the clearing where the whispering tree had once stood, they stopped. "What is this?" one muttered. The clearing was gone. In its place rose a forest that none had ever seen. It had not been there a week ago, and yet the trees towered like they'd been growing for centuries. They weren't the palms or iraka or tamarind they knew. These trees curved as if listening. Their bark shimmered, not brown but deep gray, almost silver. Their roots curled around each other like fingers laced in prayer. Vines hung low from the branches, thick and soft, glowing faintly in the shade. The very air shimmered. Hummed. This land was bare, whispered another. It was ash. Now it was a cradle of grain. The hunters should have turned back. But curiosity has teeth sharper than fear. They stepped in. Immediately, the hum grew louder, not mechanical, not wind, but voices. Dozens. Hundreds. Whispering. Singing. Mourning. Rejoicing. The forest spoke, not in full words, but in pulses, in breath. "Do you hear that?" one asked. "Voices," said another. "Every tree." The deeper they went, the more unnatural it became. Flowers turned toward them as they passed, not with faces, but with movement. Some opened as if gasping. Others whispered. One tree near the edge wept, actual drops of water trailing from the knots in its trunk like tears. It was alive, but not just alive. It was aware. Then they saw him. At the foot of a great tree, half wrapped in vines, sat a man, gaunt, bearded, eyes deep as a forgotten well. Abadil, one hunter gasped. The chief's son. He had vanished 3 moons ago, on a journey to another village. His horse had returned alone, hooves soaked in river mud. Now here he was. He stood slowly, vines slipping from his shoulders like a discarded cloak. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, steady. The hunters froze. "Where have you been?" one asked. "I followed the roots," he said. "I came to find answers. But I found her instead." "Who?" Abadil turned his gaze toward the heart of the forest, where the trees grew impossibly tall, their tops vanishing into a silver haze. "Maku," he said. "She is here." One hunter stepped forward. "Alive?" Abadil nodded once. "But not as before. She is not the girl they chained. She is more." He took a breath. His hands trembled slightly. "She is the forest now. The voice in the roots. The fire in the soil. They call her the Root Queen." The hunters glanced at one another, shifting uneasily. "She built this?" one asked. Abadil shook his head. "She woke it. This place was always sleeping beneath Elialu. She only gave it voice." Silence. Then Abadil added, more quietly, "She remembers everything." "What does she want?" the oldest hunter asked. "She doesn't want revenge," Abadil said. "Not in the way you think." He gestured to a tree nearby, a gnarled, twisted one, wrapped tight in vines. At its base, something stirred. A groan. A whimper. The hunters looked closer. A face. Eyes wide. Mouth open. Frozen in terror. The entire body of a man, no older than 30, bound completely in vines. He wasn't dead. His chest rose and fell slowly, like breath dragged against will. "Who is he?" whispered one hunter. "A man who beat his daughter until she couldn't speak," Abadil replied. "She came here. She told the roots." The hunters recoiled slightly. "There are others?" another asked. Abadil's expression darkened. "Dozens." They looked around. In the far trees, they noticed more vines, coiled tightly, curved around shapes. Some twitched. Some remained still. Some cried. "Any who harm the silenced, the forgotten, the hidden, they don't return," Abadil said. "Not because Maka kills them, but because the forest remembers what others choose to forget." The youngest hunter dropped to one knee. "What should we tell the village?" Abadil looked up, eyes flashing. "Tell them this: she will return, not with fire, but with truth." A gust of wind blew through then, swirling the leaves, lifting the petals from the trees, carrying with it hundreds of voices, girls, women, spirits, singing without sound. It rushed past the hunters and out toward the village they came from. Abadil turned and began walking deeper into the forest. "She is listening," he said over his shoulder. "And now, the world must decide whether to listen back." The trees closed behind him. The forest swallowed the path. And for the first time in the history of Eliulu, 5 armed men walked back in silence, not because they were told to, but because they now understood the power of being heard. The hunters had no intention of finding anything new. They simply wanted to track the strange prints near the river, clawed marks, not quite animal, not quite human. They moved in silence, 5 men with bows strapped to their backs, blades at their hips, and prayers in their throats. The wind tugged at their wrappers. Something about the air felt off. It was colder. Thicker. As though the forest breathed differently. But when they reached the clearing where the whispering tree had once stood, they stopped. "What is this?" one muttered. The clearing was gone. In its place rose a forest that none had ever seen. It had not been there a week ago, and yet the trees towered like they'd been growing for centuries. They weren't the palms or iraka or tamarind they knew. These trees curved as if listening. Their bark shimmered, not brown but deep gray, almost silver. Their roots curled around each other like fingers laced in prayer. Vines hung low from the branches, thick and soft, glowing faintly in the shade. The very air shimmered. Hummed. "This land was bare," whispered another. "It was ash. Now it was a cradle of grain." The hunters should have turned back. But curiosity has teeth sharper than fear. They stepped in. Immediately, the hum grew louder, not mechanical, not wind, but voices. Dozens. Hundreds. Whispering. Singing. Mourning. Rejoicing. The forest spoke, not in full words, but in pulses, in breath. "Do you hear that?" one asked. "Voices," said another. "Every tree." The deeper they went, the more unnatural it became. Flowers turned toward them as they passed, not with faces, but with movement. Some opened as if gasping. Others whispered. One tree near the edge wept, actual drops of water trailing from the knots in its trunk like tears. It was alive, but not just alive. It was aware. Then they saw him. At the foot of a great tree, half wrapped in vines, sat a man, gaunt, bearded, eyes deep as a forgotten well. Abadil, one hunter gasped. The chief's son. He had vanished 3 moons ago, on a journey to another village. His horse had returned alone, hooves soaked in river mud. Now here he was. He stood slowly, vines slipping from his shoulders like a discarded cloak. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, steady. The hunters froze. "Where have you been?" one asked. "I followed the roots," he said. "I came to find answers. But I found her instead." "Who?" Abadil turned his gaze toward the heart of the forest, where the trees grew impossibly tall, their tops vanishing into a silver haze. "Maku," he said. "She is here." One hunter stepped forward. "Alive?" Abadil nodded once. "But not as before. She is not the girl they chained. She is more." He took a breath. His hands trembled slightly. "She is the forest now. The voice in the roots. The fire in the soil. They call her the Root Queen. The hunters glanced at one another, shifting uneasily. She built this? One asked. Abadil shook his head. She woke it. This place was always sleeping beneath Elilu. She only gave it voice. Silence. Then Abadil added, more quietly, she remembers everything. What does she want? The oldest hunter asked. She doesn't want revenge, Abadil said. Not in the way you think. He gestured to a tree nearby, a gnarled, twisted one, wrapped tight in vines. At its base, something stirred. A groan. A whimper. The hunters looked closer. A face. Eyes wide. Mouth open. Frozen in terror. The entire body of a man, no older than 30, bound completely in vines. He wasn't dead. His chest rose and fell slowly, like breath dragged against will. Who is he? Whispered one hunter. A man who beat his daughter until she couldn't speak, Abadil replied. She came here. She told the roots. The hunters recoiled slightly. There are others, another asked. Abadil's expression darkened. Dozens. They looked around. In the far trees, they noticed more vines, coiled tightly, curved around shapes. Some twitched. Some remained still. Some cried. Any who harm the silenced, the forgotten, the hidden, they don't return, Abadil said. Not because Maka kills them, but because the forest remembers what others choose to forget. The youngest hunter dropped to one knee. What should we tell the village? Abadil looked up, eyes flashing. Tell them this, she will return, not with fire, but with truth. A gust of wind blew through then, swirling the leaves, lifting the petals from the trees, carrying with it hundreds of voices, girls, women, spirits, singing without sound. It rushed past the hunters and out toward the village they came from. Abadil turned and began walking deeper into the forest. She is listening, he said over his shoulder. And now, the world must decide whether to listen back. The trees closed behind him. The forest swallowed the path. And for the first time in the history of Elilu, 5 armed men walked back in silence, not because they were told to, but because they now understood the power of being heard. They say the village of Elilu no longer exists. Maps show a patch of green where once there were paths and compounds and rice fields. No one can agree on when it disappeared. Some say it happened overnight. Others claim it was slow, a crawling of roots, a whispering of soil, a quiet consumption that took place in the shadow of silence. But those who know, truly know, say Elilu was not swallowed. They say it was claimed. By her. By the girl they chained to a tree. By the voice they tried to bury. Now, where the village once stood, there is a forest. But not one born of ordinary seed and sun. This forest breathes. It listens. It remembers. No trail leads to it. No guide can find it twice. It hums at dusk, echoes at dawn, and glows faintly at midnight like it's lit from its own roots. Vines grow in spirals. Trees lean as if listening to one another. Some bend toward the earth, some stretch unnaturally high, and in the center of it all, where once the whispering tree stood, is a shrine, not built, but grown. And at its center, a tree stands that does not stay still. They call it the walking tree. They say it moves, slowly, silently, patiently. It is not always in the same place. Some see it near rivers. Others swear they found it behind their house just after lying to their daughter. One woman claimed she heard it dragging its roots across the stone floor of the market after she struck a girl who spoke too boldly. The tree never rushes. But it never stops. They say its bark holds faces, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some smiling. Some weeping. Some with mouths covered in vines. And the vines? They do not wait for instructions. They twist and coil through the land, seeking stories. Seeking truth. Seeking lies. They wrap gently around those who carry pain and lift them from the ground. But for those who cloak cruelty in tradition, the vines do not lift, they tighten. Elulalu is not marked on any trade route now. Those who seek it out to conquer it, to study it, or to profit from it, don't return. But stories travel farther than footsteps. In distant lands, women whisper them into each other's hair. They speak of a girl who was bound for speaking. A girl whose voice made flowers bloom, and whose truth shattered shrines. A girl who walked into silence and returned as the roots beneath everything. They speak of the Root Queen. Some say she was a spirit all along, the child of wind and soil, sent to punish. Others say she was simply a girl who was not afraid to speak, and the earth heard her. But the story does not end there. In remote villages, where rules still silence and old laws still crush, women have begun to pass down a new ritual. It is not written. It is not taught in temples. It begins with a walk, deep into any forest, any place where the wind hums and the trees lean. There, they search for the shrine. Some find it quickly. Some must return for many nights. But eventually, those who carry truth in their bellies and bruises on their spirits find it. A natural archway formed of twisted branches. A pool with petals floating like tongues. And in the center, a tree with bark soft as skin. They say if you write your pain onto a piece of bark and tie it to the tree, something will happen. If your truth is true, the vines will unfurl. They will lift you, gently. They will carry you into the earth, not to bury, but to open a doorway beneath the world. No one knows what waits beyond. But none of those lifted have ever returned, and none are searched for. Because their mothers, their sisters, their daughters know. They have been freed. But if the pain is false, if the words are lies meant to harm, if the name written is innocent, then the forest responds differently. It grows over your mouth. Not immediately. First, a vine appears near your bed. Then on your skin. Then, one morning, you wake and find yourself speechless. The roots are in your throat. The bark is under your tongue. You cannot lie again. You cannot speak at all. Some say this is justice. Others call it a curse. But the ones who know, the ones who remember Maku, know it is a mirror. Elulalu was not the only village built on silenced voices. It was just the first to fall. Now, women gather beneath moonlight to whisper to leaves. Girls write words into soil with their fingers. Wives lean into tree trunks and breathe out truths they were never allowed to say. The wind carries these stories. And sometimes, if you are quiet, not silenced, but truly quiet, you can hear her. Not yelling. Not screaming. Just speaking. Steady. Clear. Soft as roots breaking stone. They tried to bury her. But the ground was listening. And now, the last line every child in distant lands learns to whisper, when they see vines curl around a doorframe or flowers bloom from a crack in the wall, is this. She was not buried. She was planted.